So, Lone Rider here, and I want to talk about something that I think a lot of people have never considered when it comes to the subject of firearms and, in particular, gun laws or gun control laws. And first off, I think a lot of people who are in favor of stricter laws, I don't think they realize that a lot of the people who oppose them politically aren't in favor of flat out anarchy. I think there's a general belief that if you're against a particular gun control proposal or even gun control on principle, as it's now being discussed, that you believe, anybody should be able to own anything up to, a howitzer. And the truth is, I think that most people, I know I certainly am, are okay with a handful of basic, simple laws designed to keep weapons away from, let's say, people with violent criminal histories or who are unstable, etc. So, most people, including most people who oppose gun control, don't have a problem with reasonable laws regarding firearms. What many of us do have a problem with, though, is laws that go overboard and laws that, instead of simply a handful of procedures designed to keep weapons away from people who shouldn't have them, are instead designed to discourage law-abiding citizens from owning firearms, are designed to restrict whole categories of firearms, so firearms accessories, including magazines, different types of stocks, etc. And the reason that most of us object to that, who do, I think, is that we've already reached the level of reasonable laws in this country. Certain states are more restrictive than others, but basically everywhere you go, you need to get a background check done in order to buy a firearm. Even in places where you don't necessarily have to get like a firearms ID card, which is what they do here in New Jersey and a handful of other states, you still get a background check done on you at the time of purchase. If you have a criminal conviction, if you have certain things in your record, you're not going to be allowed to purchase that firearm. So we already have basic rules in place designed to deter or prevent people who shouldn't have a gun, essentially, from getting one. Now, will this prevent them from getting one illegally, buying one on the street or from their friend or whatever? Not necessarily, but it will certainly prevent them from getting one legally, which is essentially all the law can really do. If somebody's willing to break the law to do something that's prohibited, then passing another law isn't going to deter them. What you need to do is have better enforcement of the laws on the books, better penalties after the fact if they're caught, etc. And that, I think, is the reason that many people like myself who object to this constant ratcheting up of the strictness of the gun laws, it's not that we don't believe there shouldn't be some basic common sense rules. But it's that we've passed the level of basic common sense rules a long time ago, and now all the restrictions that they're proposing basically are falling on the shoulders of the law-abiding. Right? It's already against the law for felons to have guns. It's already against the law for, you have to do a background check to buy a gun legally at a gun dealer, at a gun store, etc. You go to a gun show, people talk about the so-called gun show loophole. That doesn't exist as a thing. If you go to a gun show, you still have to, any of the dealers there still have to perform a background check before selling you a weapon. Now, there is the aspect of private individual sales from one individual to another. And for those, in many places, you're not required to do a background check. And people argue, well, who does it hurt just to make sure that you do a background check? Nobody. It might be a nuisance or a really stupid thing or an inconvenience, depending on who you're selling it. I mean, if you have a father transferring a gun to his son, who he's known his whole life and raised, I mean, what's the point of him doing a background check? But okay, who does it hurt for him to do that? It's a nuisance, but it's not going to, it doesn't hurt the son or the father. If you have a guy, let's say I have a friend I've known all my life, and his brother wants to buy a gun, and I had a gun and I was going to sell it to him, and I've known friend all my life. I've known his brother just about as long. I know his brother's an upstanding guy. He's never been in trouble with the law. He's a responsible person. The friend I'm using for this example, his brother was in the military and discharged honorably, so he knows how to use guns, etc. If I owned a gun and I wanted to sell it to him, who does it hurt to do a background check? Nobody. Again, it's a nuisance. It's unnecessary in that case because you know the person. But does it hurt anybody to do it? No. However, the question when you're passing a law requiring somebody to do something shouldn't be just, does requiring them to engage in the activity by law hurt anyone? You also have to consider what happens if they don't do what's required by law. Because think about this, right? If I was going to, let's say, whether it's a person selling a gun to a friend or a friend's brother who they've known their entire life since they were in, grade school, grammar school, or whether it's a father leaving, transferring a gun to his son, or grandpa transferring a gun to his grandson. If you have a person who is selling or transferring a gun to somebody they know, the question becomes, would they even think to do the background check? There's no need in their mind. They know that person, right? So the question isn't, well, who does it hurt to require that you do a background check? It doesn't hurt anybody. It's just a delay. It's a nuisance. It's a stupid thing. But, in that circumstance, it's a stupid thing because you know the person. But the point is, it doesn't hurt anybody. It's just a nuisance. However, what happens if they don't do the background check? Then it hurts people. Then you have a guy who could potentially be going to prison or getting other legal sanctions imposed on him for not doing a background check that it would never occur to a person to do in the first place, because what reasonable person is going to do a background check on their own son or their own nephew or their best friend who they've known since they were 8 years old? So the question isn't, who does it hurt to require that you do this? It's that when you require that somebody does it, there's the issue of the legal penalty if they don't. And if what you're requiring them to do is something that a reasonable person would never even think to do in the first place, precisely because it's overkill, it's stupid, it's foolish, it doesn't make sense in that context, etc., then what you're setting up is a situation where reasonable people who have no criminal intent, who have no desire to do anything harmful or bad, and who in fact aren't doing anything harmful or bad, objectively, you can look at it and say, nobody's being hurt by this transaction, nobody's being put at risk, nobody's injuring anybody or threatening anybody. So it's not just a question of an opinion. Well, he didn't feel like he did anything wrong. He is not doing anything wrong, objectively, but it's still against the law in this case, if you require background checks for individual purchases, which I think is what a lot of people are talking about when they talk about the so-called gun show loophole. They're not talking about the idea of going to a gun show and buying something from a gun dealer, because all the vendors who set up at that gun show have to do a background check on you if you're buying a firearm. I think what they're talking about with the so-called gun show loophole, which they are not clear about, I think they want people to think that you can go to a gun show and buy a gun from a dealer without him doing a background check. But the only so-called loophole that exists is for private person-to-person sales. In other words, if you meet somebody in the parking lot outside the gun show that's coming out of there with an old, let's say he's got an old rifle that he wasn't able to sell to somebody inside, and you decide, hey, I want to buy it off him, yeah, standing outside in the parking lot, he can sell it to you. And he doesn't have to do a background check on you because it's a private person selling it to a private person. At least he's not required to do a background check on you in all localities. Some places I think they talk about requiring this, but it's not a national requirement. So in that sense, there is a loophole, but that's not a loophole peculiar to gun shows. I mean, again, if I'm over my friend's house and he says, hey, do you still have that old .38 caliber revolver? I'd like to buy it off you. As long as I know that he's not somebody who's prohibited from owning a firearm, like some kind of convicted violent felon or something, I can sell it to him. Now, I guess the question becomes, if you don't know the person and you have reason to think that they might be a sketchy individual, then you're required to do a background check. But yeah, as long as it's somebody that that's not. In other words, if you sell a gun to somebody who you think is clean and they're a felon, you could still get in trouble. But if you're selling a gun to somebody who you have no reason to suspect, like let's say somebody you've known since you were 8 years old, yeah, that is the extent of this so-called loophole. But it's not a gun show loophole. It has nothing to do with vendors at gun shows who are required to do background checks. It has to do with private purchases. And the problem with that is, again, not so much that does requiring a background check for all private purchases or exchanges of firearms, change of ownership of firearms, does requiring that you do the background check hurt anybody? No. Again, it may inconvenience people. It may be foolish, depending on the context, especially, again, if it's, your own son or nephew or grandson or whatever, or your best friend. But the point is that it doesn't hurt anybody to require that you do that. It's just a nuisance, a hindrance. However, if you require that somebody does it and they don't do it, because they would never think to, because what you're requiring them to do is, again, so absurd in that context that it's something a reasonable person would never even think to do, then what you end up doing is risking legal sanctions and legal penalties, including possibly criminal penalties, such as jail time and prison, for something a reasonable person would never even think to not do. In other words, a reasonable person it would never even occur to them that this is something that shouldn't be done because and you could say, well, ignorance of the law is no excuse, this, that, there, and the next thing. But the point is, when the law essentially requires people to do what no reasonable person would even think to do, then you increase the likelihood that people who have no harmful intent, who don't intend or actually do anything wrong, in other words, you're basically criminalizing normal behavior, and you increase the likelihood that the prisons are going to be filled with regular, otherwise law-abiding citizens who literally just are going about their business because you've criminalized something that's normal, like a father giving a gun to his son. So the issue with requiring stricter and stricter laws, including tightening these so-called loopholes, for many of us, it's really that we already have laws in place to address the concern of people who shouldn't have guns buying them. If they try to go around those by buying those illegally, then the issue becomes, you have to just try and enforce the law better against, let's say, a felon illegally possessing a gun, etc. If he's caught with it. But the way it sits right now, like, the things that people are really worried about, the people that they're really worried about getting their hands on guns, bad people, people with sketchy criminal histories, etc., it's already illegal for those people to have most types of weapons. So what does that mean? Well, the new restrictions that people are constantly talking about, whether it's closing so-called loopholes of private sales, whether it's, which are incorrectly identified as being related to gun shows when they're not, whether it's talking about restricting certain types of magazines, whether it's talking about restricting certain whole categories of firearms, etc. These are restrictions that are simply tightening the rules under which the law-abiding already live. If it's already against the law for, let's say, a convicted violent felon to own a firearm, then it's already against the law for that convicted violent felon to have a firearm with a normal capacity magazine or with a bump stock or with whatever. Because it's simply against the law for him to have a gun, period. So what are these new restrictions going to curtail? They're not going to further curtail gun ownership by felons because it's already against the law for felons to own firearms. We've reached that reasonable level, including doing background checks at every proper gun store and dealer and whatnot. So what is left? Well, further restrictions on the law about it. You have two categories. You have the people who are legally prohibited from owning firearms and the people who aren't. The people who are legally prohibited from owning firearms can't own a gun no matter what kind of gun it is. So why does further restricting certain types of guns or types of gun sales, how does that help if what you're worried about is those people getting their hands on a gun? It doesn't, because they're already off the board legally. Now, again, they may try and skirt the law. They may try and do this or that. How do you address that? Well, you can't make it double secret illegal. It's already illegal, right? What are you going to do? Make it double secret illegal? No. You just have to better try and enforce those laws, et cetera, et cetera. And, a lot of this has to do with, DAs make plea bargains, prisons are overcrowded, armed robbery gets bled down to simple robbery, the gun disappears, so there's not an additional penalty for being, using a gun in the crime, and then, so the deterrent aspect that could be there is lost because the district attorney is trying to simply get it, plead it down so that he can move the cases along or beef up his conviction record, or they want to move people through prisons because the prisons are overcrowded, so somebody gets maybe released early when he shouldn't because he used a gun in a crime and he's a bad guy. In other words, this isn't really so much about the laws regarding firearms, because as far as the felons and bad guys and people who are worried about getting guns are concerned, legally it's already off the board as a legal option for them. If you're concerned about them violating those restrictions, then what you're really not concerned about so much as gun laws. You're concerned about enforcement and the vagaries of the prosecutorial and plea bargaining process and sentencing and deterrent and all of that stuff. And I would have no problem with if a person uses a gun in a violent crime to harm another, having additional penalties, which in many places they do. But again, that kind of gets defeated when people start pleading things down and armed robbery becomes robbery and the gun essentially disappears and they're not getting punished for that. So, in other words, this is, if you're worried about bad guys having guns, you really shouldn't be focusing on what the laws are for guns, because it's already against the law for the bad guys to have guns. What you should be focusing on is enforcement and other aspects of the criminal and legal process. Now, if you just generally hate guns or don't like the idea of law-abiding people owning guns, that's different. But then be honest about it and be like, well, we just don't like the idea of anybody having guns. So it's got nothing to do with preventing crime or preventing gun violence. We just don't like the idea that people go target shooting once a week or whatever. And if that's the case, okay, then be honest about it. And that, I think, is why people like myself, again, we're totally okay with having some basic restrictions. But we passed that level in this country, even in states with looser gun laws, a long time ago. And again, the logic seems to be, when people are positing new restrictions, well, who's it going to hurt? How about all the people who could go to jail if they don't comply with the restriction, because it's so absurd and so strict that they would never even think to comply with it. Again, for example, requiring that a father provide a background check on his own son before giving him or selling him a gun. It's not so much, well, who does it hurt to require him to do the background check? It doesn't really hurt. It's just a nuisance. But what happens if he doesn't do it? Because, again, what you're requiring him to do is something that's so unreasonable that most people wouldn't even think to do it in the first place. Well, again, then you've essentially outlawed reasonable behavior, and there's a great chance that your prisons may become filled with people who are otherwise lawful and productive citizens, because what you've essentially done is you've outlawed reasonable behavior that most people would never even think to refrain from doing, like a father giving a gun to his own son without doing a background check on him. So the question isn't who does it hurt to make you do the background check for every private sale. The question is, when you require that, are you setting up a situation where the simple requirement could hurt people by essentially you're making reasonable behavior illegal, right? Again, if I know somebody all my life, whether it's my son, my father, my nephew, my best friend, or my best friend's brother, and I own a gun and I want to sell or give it to them even as a gift, why would I think to do a background check on my son, my nephew, my best friend, my best friend's brother? Why would I even think to do that? I know them. But of course, if your idea is to close that so-called loophole in private sales, you make that a crime. You make thinking, well, yeah, I know this guy. Why would I do a background check on him? You make that a crime. You make being a reasonable person against the law. And then there's a great chance that in addition to being filled with gangbangers and thugs and psychos, your prisons may actually become filled with otherwise law-abiding people. Which brings me to the biggest reason that many people like myself object to constantly increasing the gun laws. Not only, again, since the criminals are already forbidden from owning most types of weapons, not only does the burden of these increases essentially fall squarely only on the shoulders of the law-abiding, because the criminals are already off the table as far as that's concerned. If it's against the law for the felon to have a firearm, period, it's obviously already against the law for him to have a semi-automatic firearm with a so-called high-capacity magazine, because it's against the law for him to have any kind of firearm, even a revolver. So these restrictions obviously are going to fall squarely on the law-abiding only. But here's another thing. It's that no matter what type of increased restriction you're talking about, because they affect the law, whatever their effect may or may not be on the criminal element, who again usually aren't an issue because it's already flat out against the law for them to have guns or be in possession of them. You have the fact that because so much of the force of these laws is going to fall on people who aren't felons, people who aren't criminals, people who, as a rule, are law-abiding. They're either going to be restricted by this, or they're going to be, caught unawares as their property is, legal one day and then declared restricted the next. You have to, if you're a gun control advocate, you have to be okay with essentially jailing innocent people. You have to be willing to say, I know this guy hasn't hurt anybody. I know that what he was doing was legal last week, and we've basically taken normal behavior and we've defined it as criminal just because we don't like what this guy does for fun on a Saturday afternoon going down to the shooting range. We know he's not going to hurt anybody. We know, in fact, because he's already had to go through a background check to get the gun, we know he's actually less likely to be a danger to the public than the general person in the street who hasn't been subjected to a criminal background check. Which is, again, the irony that the bulk of the force of these laws falls on law-abiding citizens who already own guns. And since the vast majority of gun purchases aren't private sales, but actually are from gun stores, where the dealers are required to do background checks by definition for all sales, what does that mean? Most of the people on whom these increased restrictions are going to fall have already undergone more scrutiny than the average private citizen, which means they're less likely to be dangerous. So why are they the ones who are being subjected to these increased restrictions? Then top it all off, because, again, you're outlawing essentially normal behavior on the part of people who aren't going to hurt anybody. They've already passed a background check to own a gun in the first place, and yada, yada, and they're law-abiding citizens, generally speaking. You have to be willing to put those people in prison and treat them as if they're a hardened felon or a school shooter or a gangbanger or some guy who did a drive-by. In other words, you have to be willing to treat your next-door neighbor, your uncle, your brother, your coworker, the town librarian, whomever, as if they're El Chapo. Right? You have to be willing to take that person who you know is not harmful, not a violent felon, not out to hurt anybody, and you have to be willing to throw him in prison and treat him like a criminal. And even if I wasn't against the idea of these increased gun control restrictions, even if I didn't worry about the way they violated the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and not just the Second Amendment, but also the protections against the unreasonable seizure of your property and due process and so on and so forth, even if I wasn't worried about just how they're going to impact the ability of people to pursue their hobbies and interests, forget about self-defense, I would be worried about the basic premise that you have to be willing, in order to support these laws, to jail innocent folk. You have to be willing to jail people who you know aren't a danger, who you know aren't going to hurt people. And it's also going to lead, in the process of trying to enforce these rules, to things like racial profiling, illegal searches, etc. Look at stop and frisk in New York. Before stop and frisk was about racially profiling young black men and was a favorite talking point of people who were concerned about the racial aspect. It was something that was a concern to those of us who were simply following the issue of gun control. I remember back when I was in high school, when I learned about the concept of stop and frisk. They didn't call it stop and frisk at the time. But what people were doing is there was a rule or procedure in New York that if the police stop somebody to question them, and they have a reason to believe they're armed and that they will be dangerous during the question, the policeman has the ability to legally search them and take possession of any weapons they may or may not have, so that the policeman isn't worried about them pulling a weapon during the duration of the questioning. But this presupposes three things. The policeman has to have a reason to question that person. The policeman has to have a reason to believe they're armed. And the policeman has to have a reason to believe that, in addition to being armed, they're dangerous in some way, or could be. What they were doing in New York is turning this on its head and stopping people they had no reason to question, no reason to believe were armed, and no reason to believe were a threat, in order to simply search them and see if they could turn up illegal guns. I mean, they're not going to go door to door and knock on people's doors to take guns away. They'll enforce these things incidentally, either racially profiling people on the street when they're walking around town, or during traffic stops when you're in your car or on your bike or whatever. And so what we've seen is gun control doesn't just lead to jailing innocent people, it also leads to civil rights violations and illegal and unlawful searches. And the irony is that the people who are against the unlawful searches, a lot of the people on the left, for example, I'm against them because I believe that people's rights shouldn't be violated. And I don't think, that, stopping somebody just because of what they look like, is a viable thing to do. Here's the funny part, though. I also don't think that, independent of the idea of the racial profiling being objectionable, even if that wasn't objectionable, and it is, and I think it is, but even if it wasn't, it would still be objectionable because what they're trying to do, using that racial profiling, is enforce unconstitutional and unfair gun laws. And, of course, if something disproportionately affects the innocent, it's not going to be just in one instance. It's not just going to disproportionately restrict the gun rights and property rights and what they can own of the innocent. It's not going to just disproportionately risk sending those people to prison. It's also going to disproportionately risk having your civil rights violated by unreasonable searches. Why? Because, well, how else are you going to enforce an unreasonable law except for unreasonable activities? The whole point of stop and frisk was that they were trying to enforce onerous gun control laws. So I find it very ironic that a lot of the people to the political left who were against the racial profiling that the gun control led to wholeheartedly support the gun control that led to the racial profiling they object to. Whereas at least somebody like myself, I'm against the idea of the racial profiling, but I'm also consistent. I'm against the gun control that leads to it. Whereas the many of the people on the left, they object to the racial profiling, but they're totally okay with the gun control that logically prompts it. And it's like, wait, so you're okay with what they're trying to do, you just don't like how they're doing it? So, do you really care about these people's rights being violated? Or do you just not like the optics? Not like how it looks? Right? I don't care how it looks. I'm concerned with the substance. I don't think people's rights should be violated, period. Which is why I, and people like myself, usually object to the increasingly strict gun laws. Again, it's not that we think anybody, including a convicted felon, should be able to own a bazooka. All right? But the point is, we already passed reasonable restrictions on firearm ownership and carrying and use a long time ago in this country, even in places that have less strict rules. And in places where the rules are much more strict, we're in crazy territory, right? So, people like myself, we're against the idea of gun control. It doesn't mean we're against the idea of any laws regarding firearm ownership or use. It just means we think there should be a handful of basic common sense procedures in place to ensure that guns aren't owned by people who clearly shouldn't have them, but that those same procedures should not be turned into a means of attempting to dissuade or discourage or penalize law-abiding citizens from owning firearms. And the problem is we passed that point a long time ago. So there you go. One of the reasons that there's a couple of reasons I talked about here, but they basically all boil down to the same thing, which is that the point of the law should be to protect people from conduct that is harmful, not to declare illegal conduct that isn't harmful and prosecute the innocent. But that, of course, is what a lot of these increasingly strict restrictions are doing. Again, it's already against the law for a felon to have a gun. So when you start outlawing specific types of firearms or firearms accessories, who's that falling on? Right? And when you try to make it against the law, something that could be punished with a jail term for a father to give a gun to his son or something like that without doing a criminal background check on him, who's going to even think to do that? I mean, logically, think about it. Most of the people that end up getting arrested under a law like that, are they going to be felons trying to illicitly obtain firearms? Or are they going to be law-abiding people to whom it would never even occur to do a criminal background check on the son that they raised and they've known all their damn life? Think about it. Lone Rider out.